many would argue that a fast 1440p or 4K 16:9 monitor is the way to go. But I disagree, because this exists. For those times where a 16:9 display just isn't wide enough and you want to feel like you're in the game, LG has the solution for you. It's called the 38GN950, and it's my favorite ultra-wide ever made. Now yes, I understand that for the same price you could get the Samsung Odyssey G9 or spend about $200 to $300 less on the Alienware AW3821DW. But this is what I chose to spend my hard-earned $1,600 on, and later I'll tell you why I chose this over the other two. Before we begin though, I want to apologize to the Alienware AW3821DW. What prompted me to get the LG in the first place was when Dell sent me the AW3821DW to review, which is basically the same as the LG with some minor differences and Alienware branding. In the conclusion of the Dell review, I basically said, why get the Alienware when the G9 exists for the same price? All without even trying the G9. After using the LG, the Alienware, and the G9, I've got some thoughts I want to share. Starting with the basics, it's got an all-plastic design with some red accents in the back and a giant RGB ring around it. The ring is brightness adjustable and lets you change to one of 4 different static colors, a peaceful flow as LG calls it, which is really just a color cycle, and dynamic, which is kind of a rainbow effect. You can't adjust the RGB to whatever color you want, which I think is kind of lame, but I will say that this is probably the brightest LED on any monitor I've ever seen. Nothing else has brightened up my desk as much as this has. The stand this comes with is pretty lame. The design is mostly nice, except for these invasive legs and the pathetic wire hook this comes with. This means that your wires will be visible instead of neatly hidden. It has 100 by 100 VESA mounting holes, so you can mount it to a monitor arm or stand, and that's what I recommend because it makes using this so much better. If you stick with the included stand, it's got tilt and height, very small amounts of pivot, and no swivel. So if you wanted to swivel your monitor to show someone something, ain't gonna happen. In terms of I/O, it's got 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, a DisplayPort 1.4 port, a headphone jack, and a USB Type-B port to power the USB hub. Now in terms of the display itself, it has a 38-inch display with a 21:9 aspect ratio, a resolution of 3840 by 1600, a 2300R curve, so it's not very curvy at all, and a max native refresh rate of 144 Hz with a 160 Hz overclock. And if you're familiar with the G9 and its 49-inch 2150 by 1440 resolution and 240 Hz, this LG may seem inferior. But there's more to a monitor than just specs. For one, this has a higher pixel density thanks to its 1600p resolution. And while the difference between 1440 to 1600 pixels doesn't sound like a lot, it actually looks noticeably more crisp. This is nice if you want to fit more stuff in a given screen area, which is great for multitasking, or if you like your games having a higher resolution for that sweet crispiness. Also, while this is nowhere near as wide as the G9, I think that's okay. With as close as my monitors are set up, the LG's screen size is a better fit for me and my desk. It's much easier looking at the corners of a 38-inch display rather than having to tilt my head further to look at the corners on something like the G9. Plus, if I really wanted that full peripheral immersion, I could pull my monitor closer because of my monitor arm, and it would block out the real world just fine. Another nice thing about the LG is the height. It's pretty tall compared to a lot of ultra-wides I've tested. Usually ultra-wides are wide and thin, but this one's long and thick, with 3 Cs. It's 21.7 inches high, which is about an inch taller than the G9's 20.6 inch tall display. Now, 1 inch might not sound like a lot, but sometimes an extra inch is all you need. In all seriousness, that extra inch of height is noticeable, and it was actually the first thing I noticed when I pulled the monitor out of the box. This is nice for me because, like I mentioned earlier, I do pull my monitor closer if I really want to be immersed in games like Star Citizen, and that extra inch of height blocks out my upper and lower periphery just a little bit more than a standard ultrawide would. But none of these are the reason why I like this more than the G9. I like this because of its Nano-IPS panel. Okay, but the Dell has the same panel and it's cheaper, so why not get that instead? We'll get to that. What I like about Nano-IPS is that it has extremely saturated colors, yet is accurate, which is evident when you look at the gamut chart. This is basically displaying the P3 color space, at least with all the default settings, because you can change the color profile to an sRGB mode in the OSD, and it would clamp the color gamut, which would take the saturated look away, making it look like a standard IPS panel. And just to give you an idea of how vibrant these Nano-IPS panels are, think of it like you're walking into the TV section of your local Best Buy. If you've ever been there, you probably already know that all those TVs on display look super colorful. That's what this looks like. Some people don't like that saturated look, but most people I know seem to like it, and I'm also most people. And when you compare it to the G9 looks relatively washed out. It's not actually washed out, but when you compare them side by side, it kind of looks like it. Now, even though colors are oversaturated, they're pretty accurate as I mentioned, having a delta E of only 4.88, with the main issue being the grays. They have a blue bias, but it's not terribly inaccurate to the point where it's noticeable to the average person. Most people won't notice the slight blue tint at all. If you want a more color accurate display, then you'll want to enable the sRGB mode, because not only does it clamp the color gamut like I mentioned earlier, but color accuracy and grayscale performance is better. Now, more accurate doesn't always mean a better experience. I know I prefer the oversaturated look, but at least it'll be a more accurate depiction of what you're supposed to see when you're consuming media on YouTube or Netflix and so on. Now, this sRGB mode won't be ideal for professional photo and video editors because usually you'll want a display calibrated to your specific color space that your work requires, which this monitor has no issues in doing. It also gets extremely bright, hitting nearly 500 nits, which means that no matter how much sunlight is in your room, you'll have zero issues seeing what you need to. Apparently, it can get as bright as at least 600 nits in HDR because it has VESA's HDR 600 certification, but I have no clue if that's actually true. What I do know is that the HDR on this is pretty mediocre. When it comes to media consumption, colors aren't as saturated as they are in SDR, looking more like the sRGB mode I mentioned earlier. Highlights look pretty much the same as they do in SDR, and I counted a total of 6 local dimming zones, which is absolutely hideous, useless, and laughable. So when it comes to the HDR in media consumption, there's not much going on. But when it comes to gaming, surprisingly, it can look a little bit better depending on the game. Take Monster Hunter World, for example. In SDR, everything is pretty bright. The shadows are pretty gray, and the sky is overexposed. When you enable HDR, the shadows are darker, which adds more depth, and the clouds are easier to see in the sky rather than just being a blown out mess. But can I see myself using the HDR in games? Sure, but the results will depend on the game, so sometimes it'll look better and sometimes it'll look worse. You just have to figure out what works best for you. Viewing angles, on the other hand, are extremely good. It's no surprise since Nano-IPS and IPS panels in general are infamous for having great viewing angles, but this panel in particular does better than most other IPS panels I've seen. There's practically no change no matter how far off axis you look. Uniformity was also very good on my unit, except for the bottom edge at peak brightness. Now, a delta E of 4 isn't bad, and I didn't notice any problems with my eyes, but regardless, the numbers are there, and I'm not entirely sure why that's so much worse than the rest of the panel. Contrast ratios aren't great. At 844:1, this is average for this kind of panel, but at this price, it should be better. This GN model cost the same as last year's GL model, and I'm sure LG could have used the money they saved by taking out the physical G-Sync module to give this a meaningful amount of local dimming zones to help with contrast, HDR, and so on. But they didn't. Instead, they took out the G-Sync module, and now this has FreeSync Premium Pro and G-Sync compatibility. I got this GN model specifically because of the lack of a physical module, because there were enough people online saying that their G-Sync fan was really loud and I just didn't want to deal with a dying module. So instead, I'll let software do the work. I know there are some people that are G-Sync module diehards, but guys, it's really not that big of a deal. This will deliver the same experience, at least mostly. G-Sync compatibility doesn't have low frame rate compensation, so it'll only work if you're running at least 48 FPS. But if you are, then you're all set. Either way, this really should be $100 to $200 cheaper since it doesn't include a physical module. Alright, now that's most things, but what about gaming? Well, if I had to sum it up in one word, that word would be epic. So like I mentioned earlier, the G9 is 11 inches wider, but at 38 inches, this LG is wide enough to where if you have a monitor arm like I do, you could just pull it closer and block out the real world no problem. Also, having that extra inch of height does do a better job of blocking your periphery, but at some point, if you're really into the game, your real world will be blocked anyway, so it doesn't even matter if you have a 49-inch or 38-inch ultra-wide. They'll feel similar in that aspect. What's different is the colors, input lag, and the overall experience. Now, here's the thing. If you're a regular viewer, you know that I love my high refresh rate displays. And I don't mean 144Hz like this LG. I mean 240Hz like the G9, 360Hz, and 390Hz with black frame insertion. But at the same time, I'm a creator who needs a lot of screen space with a pleasing viewing experience. And while the G9 is wider, meaning more screen space, and has a higher refresh rate, meaning better for competitive titles, I couldn't get over that VA panel. There's nothing technically wrong with it, like it's got some of the best response times, period, no matter what panel you're comparing it to, and it's 240Hz, which honestly, I don't see why this LG couldn't be 240Hz. I wish it was, and I'm expecting LG will release a 240Hz model in the near future, at least I hope. But that doesn't mean that the LG is bad, it's not. Like, look at these response times. Sure, they're not the best of the best, and it doesn't have black frame insertion, but as long as you're not mostly playing competitive titles, this will be more than fine. Don't forget, while a lot of viewers of the channel are 240Hz and higher enthusiasts, the majority of people aren't. And if I wanted to play competitively, I have other 16:9 monitors to fill my competitive crave. Ultrawides are not my go-to for that. And when it comes to immersive titles like Star Citizen, for example, that can really take advantage of these vibrant colors, and this monitor is amazing. Anyway, with what this looks and feels like in competitive games, this is more than enough for most people. And in everything else, it's exceptional. Input lag was also very good. It's basically just like any other high-end 144Hz monitor, so think of that and apply it here. The black equalizer is also good, so if you plan on playing competitive titles or games where you just want to see dark areas easier, you'll have absolutely no issues with this. It's one of the better black equalizers I've tested, though the Zowie is still king. Oh, and if you wanted to increase the already saturated colors, you have a color vibrance feature to do that. Now, I want to revisit the contrast ratios. You'd think that the G9 with its 3001 contrast ratios would be that much better, but it's not. Don't get me wrong, there is a difference, but it's not that big of a difference, and it'll always be that way unless we have monitors with high amount of local dimming zones like the new G9 Neo, which I'll also be trying to get my hands on. Lastly is the OSD. You can control it with either the navigation nipple or through software, though I use the nipple because my software basically locks my PC whenever I adjust something. That doesn't seem to be the issue for other people though, but let me know if you're having this issue because I kind of want to get an idea of if this is a widespread problem or not. Anyway, you can adjust which color profile you're on, game adjust to enable the 160Hz overclock, turn on and off your adaptive sync, adjust the black equalizer, response times, and choose your crosshair. You also have your standard picture settings like your brightness, contrast, gamma, RGB setting, and 6-color, which is the saturation. This is standard stuff. One thing I wish this had was picture-by-picture or at least picture-in-picture. Both of these are missing here, and I feel like that's a necessity on an ultrawide. So now you know why I chose this over the G9, but why did I choose this over the Alienware? After all, it's the same monitor with most of the same features, it's cheaper, and it has G-Sync Ultimate. And that's one of the reasons why. I'm not sure what the exact failure rate is for a G-Sync module, nor do I know how many fans are going haywire, but there are enough people complaining online to where I just can't ignore it. And when you consider these monitors aren't exactly cheap and most people won't be getting one in the first place, failure rates seem high. Plus, G-Sync compatibility works just fine for what I use it for. Also, the OSD on the Alienware can't be controlled via software, and it isn't as easy to control with the navigation nipple as it will be with the LG. And the black equalizer on the Alienware sucks, and I do use it. I don't just talk about them in my videos for no reason. And that's about it. Those few things are worth the extra $100 to $200 to me compared to the Alienware. It probably isn't to most people, so if you are in the market for this or the Alienware, you should probably get the Alienware. If you like those extra features, get the LG. And if you like super wide and super high refresh rate gaming, get the G9. But that's pretty much it. This is a new style of video I'm trying compared to the super structured ones I had before, so if you're a regular viewer, let me know if you like this more or what I should change or if you like the other style more. Other than that, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you loved it, consider subscribing or supporting me on Patreon. A major thanks to my Patreons on screen, and as always, have a great day, every day. Peace.